Hello, I'm Lydia Talbot. Welcome to Sanctuary. 50 years ago, civil rights activists marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and into history. Then there were signs that said whites only. Today, there's a voting rights museum and the city's second black mayor. Chicago Theological Seminary, the Chicago Sunday Evening Club, and Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries invite you to step inside the stories of the people and the struggle of Selma at 50, still marching for justice then and now. Stay with us for some ideas on the journey and new bridges to cross that will challenge what you think about your politics and your faith today on Sanctuary.
In 1965, Chicago Theological Seminary President Howard Schomer, along with faculty and students, including the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., marched alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. The Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965 were part of an effort known as the Voting Rights Movement, highlighting racial injustice in the South. The marches contributed to the passage that year of the Voting Rights Act, a landmark achievement of the 1960s American Civil Rights Movement. 50 years later, Chicago Theological Seminary hosted a conference and reunion. Selma at 50, Still Marching, reflected on the legacy of civil rights activism and how that legacy informs current struggles for equality and justice.
Selma at 50, Still Marching. 50 years ago, we had students who went to the Selma March. As a matter of fact, some of our students went to then President Howard Schomer and said, President Schomer, we want to go to this march and we'd like for you to excuse us from classes. And he said, absolutely not. Exams are coming. We're not going to excuse you from classes. And so that was that. They left. They decided to go to the march anyway. They got down to Selma, and who is the first person they saw in Selma? Howard Schomer.
My name is Dr. Jim Ingersoll. I came to CTS in 1965, was part of the class that collectively marched in Selma, Alabama. I somehow found some money somewhere and flew in an airplane down to Birmingham, and somehow found a car and rode with a couple guys down to Selma. Through the gauntlet of cops that were solid all the way between Birmingham and Selma. It was an amazing kind of gauntlet. Well, I was a pretty naive kid that came out of Iowa. You know, the cop was always the friendly guy in the corner to me. So this was a massive presentation of police power that I had never seen before and was completely blown away by.
My name is Jim Burford, and I was a seminary student, a first-year student here at Chicago Theological Seminary when the Bloody Sunday happened, and Dr. King made the call initially for clergy and for seminary students and other people of goodwill and compassion to join him in Selma, Alabama to march or to protest or to do whatever he had in mind that we didn't know when we decided to take the trip to Selma.
Jesse Jackson was a student here, and he was the stimulus and linked for all of us to the knowledge of what was happening.
I really came here as a Southerner from the South, Baptist, with Jesus in my pocket. He followed me wherever I went. But I left here following him, and Jesus in my pocket means he goes where I go, and that may not be acceptable. There's no risk in Jesus following us. Risk in us following Jesus. It's easier to admire him than to follow him. I went to Chicago Theological Seminary, class of 64, and here in 64 and 65, left to go to work with Dr. King, came back and got my degree and my master's at Chicago Theological Seminary. Beyond the marches of yesteryear, today you still have the huge gap between the very wealthy and the very poor. Too few have too much, and too many have virtually nothing. You still have the struggle today for health care for all people based upon need. You still have the quest today for equal access to public education. And you still have the challenge of gender equality, the challenges of too much war and too much hatred and too much violence, and not enough reconciliation. So there are marches beyond Selma. And often what happened yesterday is the predicate for today and how to confront it. When I got to Selma in 1965, Dr. Sherman, our president, was there. I got to Selma 50 years later, Dr. Alice Hunt, our president, was there.
I wanted to go to Selma not so much as a celebration of what has happened in the past, but as a recognition of what needs to happen now. So Rabbi Rachel Mikva and I went together, and some of our students were there. It was fascinating to be there. It was overwhelming, it was inspiring, it was sad, all of those things together. There's this little town called Selma, Alabama. There's one hotel and maybe 2 restaurants, and 125,000 people converged there. For as far as we've come, in 50 years since the Selma March, there are also ways when we have not come very far at all. We've got violence happening in our country, not outside our country, in our country right now, in the city of Chicago, where some lives seem to not matter as much as other lives. And that's what they were fighting for in Selma 50 years ago, and we're still dealing with that issue.
After seeing the news on the TV about Bloody Sunday, Jesse began to organize a little contingent of us to go to Selma with him. And we filled up his little Corvair, we filled up Jim Burford's Volkswagen bus, and a caravan down to Selma. It was an incredible experience. I had never been in the, well, I'd driven through the South, but I'd never been in the South. And to have pulled into a service station to get gasoline somewhere in Tennessee, and have a pickup truck with a gun rack in the back window with guns in it, pull out to follow us for a while. That was just unnerving to me.
I flew from Chicago to Atlanta, and then SCLC had a whole group of Volkswagen microbuses, and they were shuffling us back from the Montgomery airport over to Selma. And the driver of our bus had been on the Bloody Sunday March. And from the whole way over from Montgomery, he was telling us all these horror stories about what had happened, and kidding us, saying, you know, the same thing's going to happen to you today. And so we kind of got involved in that.
Well, when we got to Selma, it was very different. It was a welcoming community. All colors were there. You know, it was black and Asian and Jewish, and it was an incredible thing because people were responding to Dr. King's call for clergy, for seminary students, and for people of goodwill to come to Selma and march with him.
It's important to remember the milestones, and we're certainly not done with Selma. It's not finished. Selma was a breakthrough in terms of voting, the ability for people to vote, for blacks to vote, but it wasn't quite the guarantee that we expected it to be. And so recent Supreme Court rulings have altered the effectiveness of the Voting Rights Bill of '65, taking away the pre-clearance requirements that would change what was required to be able to vote and so forth. That created a new challenge, I think, for people who care about voting rights. We certainly don't have, as in the Constitution, it's interesting that there's no federal guarantee of the right to vote. There are regulations about how voting is handled, and it's handled at the state level, basically. So if you don't have the right at the state level to vote, you don't have the right to vote. And that's a constitutional issue, and I think that's going to be one of the other challenges coming up, is whether we can get a federally protected right to vote for everyone.
We finally are starting to march again. I think for a minute, we had taken a pause. And like Reverend Jesse Jackson said earlier this morning, we assumed we had won, or we thought that we had made so many different marks and worked with the challenges that were before us, that we tended to think that things were going to just progress. But you have to fight for everything that you want and you need.
There has been, in my opinion, a sense of malaise amongst people of my generation, as well as the younger generation. And I see a change happening as a result of the recent injustices committed against black males in the United States.
If you look at the organizing of Selma, a faith-based community in Selma, Alabama, if you look what's happening, whether you're talking about Ferguson, you're talking about New York, you're talking about Chicago, we see the connections. We see systemic issues around inequality and race and gender. That continues. We've had progress, but we still have so much to go. So we don't want to think that we reached the promised land. We just have a promised moment.
Well, the conference theme of Selma at 50, Still Marching, is really appropriate for the time, because we are not finished with voting rights, number one, and there's so many other issues that now are beginning to emerge in terms of mass incarceration, the spread, the gap in income discrepancy, that is tremendously big. Quality education still remains on the agenda. So quality schools rather than quality jails, which is what we're building right and left. We need to have an excellent school system and decriminalize more things that put people in jail unnecessarily.
It's my view that faith communities are perhaps the most important group of people who need to raise their voices today. What we face today is not just a crisis of public policy. What we face today is a spiritual and moral crisis. A human rights nightmare is occurring on our watch, and we have been far too silent for too long. So for people of faith and conscience to begin to engage in these conversations and find their own voice in this time and recognize their own complicity with a system that really is predicated on denying to God's children the very forms of compassion, forgiveness, and opportunities for redemption that we all claim to cherish. And faith communities in some states during the civil rights movement were a place where you could be part of your faith community and feel like you're a part of the movement. Most people don't feel that their church is in any way actually part of or leading the movement, and so they don't know where to go. And so when I say we need to kind of begin to transition or move from protest politics to long-term movement building, we need to begin to think of ourselves as building a movement and develop the capacity and the infrastructure, as well as kind of the vision and goals of what this movement is and what we're ultimately about, because it can't be just ending police killings of unarmed black men, and it can't just be ending discrimination against people who have been formerly incarcerated. We have to have a vision of what we're up to. In my view, the vision is about building a human rights movement that will ultimately, honor the dignity and humanity of all of us, no matter who you are, where you came from, or what we may have done.
I think still marching means that despite it all, despite the millions cycling in and out of our prisons and jails, despite so much hopelessness, and despite the appearance of great racial progress, we're still marching. We are still committed to building a movement for racial and social justice and transforming our collective understanding about what justice means. I think, in recent years, many have become quite complacent in imagining that somehow the ugly days of racial division, exclusion, and control are behind us, and that we're in a different place. And to say we're still marching is an acknowledgement that things haven't changed as much as they ought to, and that we're committed still.
Sam Cooke and maybe your generation said a change is going to come. Mm-hmm. And if we have that faith and that feeling, that religiosity, that spirituality, then we develop plans to make this place, this world, this city, a better, fairer place for all people. That's the kind of spirit that Dr. King brought, that he didn't have to be walking in those places. But he had he was not trapped, but he caught the spirituality of Gandhi, who didn't have to do that either, trying to bring about change. So you have to, in my field, at age 96, all of you'll be that age one day. What do you want to say about the world that you'll be living in when you get to be 96?
Younger generations always teach preceding generations what is happening. And we're learning right now, just like when Martin Luther King Jr. and before him, Vernon Johns said to the elders of the church who said, wait, no, we don't need to be doing this. They said, yes, we need to be doing this. We need to be doing it now. And you can see that in the same way in the younger generation, say in the movement that started in the streets of Ferguson, and they've been told, no, you did your march, okay, that's enough. No, it's not just a march, it's a movement. We are doing this now, and not only are we doing this now, but we're using current ideas and current social media to make this happen.
My name is Waltrina Middleton. I serve as the National Minister for Youth Advocacy with the United Church of Christ. With youth ministry, I was called to it, particularly in the role that I serve now, because I really love this idea of youth advocacy. I saw many positions that promoted youth ministry, period. But to have a ministry that is committed to advocacy and formational work is very inspiring to me. Young people do look to adults for that mentorship and guidance, and to help provide resources they need that inspire their gifts and ways that they can use that gift. But more specifically, how do you use your gifts, your calling, or just your youthfulness, and how does that intersect with justice? What's really inspiring is seeing young people affirm the gifts that they have gained from those who came before them.
This is your space, this is our space to be in dialogue with one another.
What about the people who already hit home? It already hit their lives. Right. So why aren't we standing together as a community to make a difference? Right. Why do we give each other the cold shoulder when it's like, oh no, that's not my place, I'm not supposed to say anything. But in those times, that is your place to step up and say, you know what, this is not my family, but I'm going to be here in place of the family.
My name is Kamaria Baker, and I'm here today to learn more about Selma at 50 and learn the impact it has on our life and why it still matters to us today. There was a lot of things that needed to happen 50 years ago, and how do we keep our legacy moving? How do we continue to be a strong community and a strong church to build better communities for the next generation and people to follow? There's a different mindset that we're going through nowadays. You have different teens who are interested in the instant gratification of the everyday ways. They want the fast money, fast everything. So I would say I'm interested in it because I am interested in where I come from, my heritage, and who was there and what they did to place me here today.
State your business, cause here, the place you live in depends on your race and privilege. And downtown there's a bunch of new buildings, glass and steel cathedrals that cost a few million. They make billions to treat and do illness with medicine and pharmaceuticals, so who's dealing? But the schools are failing, screw children. Just make sure my office has a see-through ceiling. Pitt University and CMU killing. Classes cost thousands, I don't see you bill them. How we gonna get a job in biotechnology if all we ever learned is survival psychology? And while we so poor trying to revive the economy, and we ain't get nothing besides an apology. Tear down the project, put up a target.
My tagline is free minds one rhyme at a time. So for me, it definitely is an activism, because I'm actually trying to create a message that hopefully inspires you to become active where you're at, or maybe get active in some of these national struggles. But I mean, of course, if you just make music for consumption or to make money, then no, you know what I'm saying? Then it becomes like consumerism. But I think if you're an artist, and to me, I mean, I look at music that we consider as timeless. There's always a message attached to it, and so, you know, I try to be one of those artists that makes that type of music that moves people to make the world a better place.
It is through the lens of religion and faith that many of us come to hold views about how we should treat and respond to those who seem to be other, the stranger, the foreigner, those who have done wrong, and the values and virtues of compassion and forgiveness, redemption, that are nearly universal to all of the great religions of the world, have so much to teach us today.
It does seem a long time ago, and so many things have changed, and yet so many things that we have known and we have been reminded of at this conference that have not changed all that much in some ways, and some of the issues certainly that we were beginning to respond to at that time 50 years ago need to be responded to again in positive and ways of peace and justice.
We were 23 years old. We were in the midst of the developmental stage of developing ideology. We formed our ideologies here, our worldviews here, and we became significant participants in history as a way to believe in our ideas and give a concrete expression to our ideas. So we put our lives on the line for our ideas.
When I am walking alongside and in solidarity with the youth, a lot of times I see young people struggling and wrestling with that self-love. They don't see beauty when they look in the mirror. They don't believe that they're smart because they're judging it based on these superficial standards of what beauty and intellect is. And so I am committed. I'm on this mission for love to inspire, I pray, young people to be able to see that all of their imperfections is perfectly beautiful, and to fall in love with themselves. And I perhaps pray that that will inspire them to be an advocate for others and get this whole love thing in motion, that we can live into a beloved community.
My name is Tracy Blackman, and I serve as pastor of Christ the King United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri. Being a pastor in St. Louis perhaps has intensified because of the killing of Michael Brown Jr., but for several years now, St. Louis, especially in the area that I'm privileged to serve, has been inundated with poverty and with joblessness and with a degree of hopelessness from a lot of people. So death is not a stranger there. I would say that what the last 250 days have brought forth is what happens when rage finally erupts. In the midst of every crisis, there are always glimmers of hope. And there have been several instances of the light of God and the hope that springs eternal showing through even in the midst of pain. So to be out on the streets in Ferguson and to see scripture come alive, when you see people who are being tear gassed and traumatized and refusing to go home in the midst of deep despair, and then someone pulls up with a truck and food or something as simple as hot chocolate when it's cold, or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, when you see that happening in the midst of all of this chaos, you know, you begin to view communion in a different way, or Last Supper in a different way. I have a granddaughter, and she doesn't know what a phone booth is. She doesn't know what a typewriter is. She can't even imagine. She'll say, "You mean like a big computer?" You know, she can't even imagine what that was like, to have to pay to use a phone, to stop on the side of a street to use a phone. She can't imagine. I pray that 50 years from now, that generation will say to me while I'm in my rocking chair, is it really true that there were days, there was a time when Black people were treated differently than other people? Is that really true? Is there really true that there was a time when if you were gay, that they treated you differently? Is that really true? That would be my hope.
We're glad you've been with us for this special edition of Sanctuary on Selma at 50, Still Marching. Your thoughts and reactions to issues and ideas at the intersection of life and faith are important to us, and we want to hear from you. Email us at gcbm@ameritech.net, visit our website at gcbm.org, and write to us at Sanctuary in care of the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries, 77 West Washington Street, Chicago 60602. That's Sanctuary, the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries, 77 West Washington Street, Chicago 60602. I'm Lydia Talbot. Thanks for keeping faith with us today on Sanctuary. May peace and justice be yours.
Thank you.